Hi, everybody, and welcome to Sail Faster with me, Pete Boland. Thank you, as always, for listening, and thank you as well for all your emails. I really enjoy hearing from you. You can reach me at pete@sailfaster.com if you're that inclined. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different, as it's a collaboration with North U's Performance Race Weeks. So, back in February, I attended North U's Performance Race Week in St. Thomas in the US Virgin Islands. This episode is going to share what that experience was like, and importantly, what did I learn from that week, and what kind of sailors will benefit from this kind of experience. Performance race weeks are designed specifically to seriously sharpen your racing skills through what is a quite intensive, very carefully structured multi-day program. That week includes both short course and distance racing. There's plenty of practice sessions, and we had expert briefings and debriefings at the beginning and end of each day. The St. Thomas event is one of 4 performance weeks run by North U alongside Seattle, Austin and St. Pete at other times of the year. So I came back with really a new set of refinements and insights about boat speed, about starting strategy and tactics, and about the mental side of racing. The real value, I think, for me lay in the focus on fundamentals, the things that genuinely drive performance, and how much your racing improves when you give those fundamentals deliberate attention. And those are things like the power of team coordination over individual competence, how to stay in that groove of perfect heel angle and speed, the impact of crew kinetics on performance, and with Kristen Berry leading the coaching, plenty on the cerebral side too, avoiding that cognitive overload that happens particularly at the start, and committing to, in his words, objective focus racing. So it was great stuff. And it was Kristen Berry, or KB as we call him, director of North U and American Sailing Performance, who invited me to attend the St. Thomas week on the proviso that I'd share the experience with the Sail Faster audience, which I'm very, very happy to do. And as you can imagine, it didn't really take much persuading. I've always been pretty curious about what someone like me could learn from a performance race week. You know where I am in terms of sailing ability. I'm a half-decent club racer with no pretensions whatsoever about my experience. So I did feel some guilt leaving my lovely wife to dig out from what was one of the heaviest snowfalls Washington, D.C. had seen in years. But I have to confess that feeling faded rather quickly as I headed off towards the warmth of the Caribbean. I do hope one day to be forgiven. So let's start with a couple of words about the location, shall we? Well, it was beautiful St. Thomas in the US Virgin Isles, so you can't really go wrong. The super friendly St. Thomas Yacht Club served as our base for the week. It was about 10-minute sail out to the racing area, so really, really convenient and a beautiful place as well. And St. Thomas Yacht Club, of course, has great DNA. This, for example, is the home of match racing champion and current US Sail GP driver Taylor Canfield. We had a great mix of weather, light and heavy air, sunshine and rain, steady breezes and gusts. It was perfect. We also had a great mix of participants, good sailors from all over the US, common denominators being a thirst for learning, a willingness to make mistakes in the pursuit of better, and an acceptance that egos would take a back seat this week. Personally, I'm delighted to see so many familiar faces there and to meet a ton of Sail Faster listeners. That was great. I was very happy to be paired with my friend Dottie from the Annapolis J105 fleet, Earl from Big Boats on Lake Michigan, and Taz, well known for his J70 Danger Mouse. I really enjoyed sailing and learning with them, and also with our talented onboard coach, Danny. Many of the other boats consisted of teams that had come en masse down to St. Thomas, but our boat was a mix of singles. Our learning platform was the IC24, which is basically a modified J24 that's used extensively in the Caribbean. It's a really honest boat. It exposed teamwork, coordination, and boat handling fundamentals really well. And having owned a couple of J boats in my time, it did have that familiar feel. Balanced, swift, easy to sail, and those deep foils that hopefully keep you out of trouble. Day 2 came with plenty of wind and chop, and as you all know, just like in light air, heavy air quickly reveals individual and team challenges. But that's what we were there for. So we practiced in pretty high winds, and which involved a lot of understanding how to properly power up and depower these kinds of boats in those situations. Here's a couple of words from two of our coaches, Danny and Spencer, on how they saw this first couple of days going. you'll have to excuse the yacht club noise in the background.
There's a big emphasis on boat handling yesterday, and just getting down crew dynamics. It's kind of a wild thing to throw a bunch of people who haven't sailed together before in boats that they've also never sailed before. So it's a lot of just kind of figuring out how to work together and try and dial in the boats. And I think towards the end of the day, you can kind of see the bonding with the team a little bit more, which is cool. And then being able to get a boat around the course efficiently was just good. And starting to work on some more speed stuff towards the end. So
to your point, it was a lot of day one, getting crew dynamics down, just nailing the fundamentals of how to get from one side of the boat to the other, how to communicate with one another, keeping your heads out of the boat. And then, then we were lucky to be able to change gears in the afternoon where it got quite light and shifty. At some point, I think we were probably sailing in 2 knots up to 6 knots with 90 to 100-degree wind shifts at some points.
Yeah, two really talented sailors and coaches there. They were great fun. I was also thrilled to see Mark Bruin and his crew of J105 racers from Chicago. We did an episode with Mark and George from Chicago probably about 18 months ago now. Here's Mark and Elizabeth from his crew talking about their early takeaways from the first couple of days.
Yesterday, for me, a big takeaway was the importance of your weight positioning, especially on these small boats. Feel it a lot more, and it's certainly going to be transferable for J105 sailing.
Yeah.
Even a scooch forward makes all the difference.
For me, a lot of it was tack exit angles and like the communication between the jib and the jib trimmer and the driver. And our coach was having us talk through, like, on the 105 you have the spreader marks. There's not spreader marks here. So the idea was like, all right, we had 70% jib trim out of the tack, or we had 80 or 90. So that's kind of like a way on this boat, and I think more translatable to other boats, about when you get out of the tack, where's the jib at, and how do you get back up to speed, back on the wind out of the tacks.
Communications was good because we already had kind of like the crew mojo, but there's still an opportunity to improve. And to what Mark said, specifically with like jib trimming, right? Like having that communication between the trimmer and the helmsperson and the main trimmer, right? Just helps everything like go far more in sync and have that feedback loop.
Day 3 was pretty intense. It was a full day dedicated to starting strategy and tactics. The morning was a series of back-to-back rolling starts, followed by a lunch break to review progress, and then back out on the water for some short course racing. And for me, this is the point where things really started to click. You could see the improvement in how we were operating as a team as the day went on, more coordinated, more confident, with better timing and acceleration, and tapping into many of the starting tips and tactics we'll learned. I'll break some of those learnings down in a few minutes. Day 4, though, was brilliant. It was a long-distance race in beautiful weather to and from St. John, with a really pleasant break in between, in which most of us swam to the local beach, which was great. Each leg of that long-distance race brought different conditions, changes in wind and waves and current, and crucially, enough time to settle into your assigned role and really start refining techniques. And I have to say that during my turn on the helm, on a long downwind leg, gliding to the islands, in sync with Taz on kite trim, I felt utterly in the groove. Day 5 was the final day and regatta day, and across the fleet, starts were now properly combative, mark groundings far tidier, and boat handling errors becoming rarer. We took turns in different roles, but I was really thrilled to steer us home to second in race 3, largely because of the trimming skills of my team, probably, and I suspect because the team decided the helm was where I could do the least damage. It wasn't all sailing. There were some great social events too, scattered throughout the week, a dinner at the yacht club for coaches and participants and families. And then we also had a night out with our coach and plus ones, really good fun. A last point, the curriculum for the week was deliberately structured to shift responsibility from coaches to the team as the week progressed. And that seemed to make a lot of sense and work for us. Okay, let's turn to what I took away in terms of performance improvements and some key learning. On our boat, we rotated roles constantly, which gave us a clear sense of how each position needed to work in sync with others. And I think one thing I'm afraid we all learned together very quickly was how utterly useless I was on the bow of an XC24. Over time, I think I've accumulated a long list of things I can't do, like calculus, German grammar, tree pose in yoga, or watching the England football team without lasting emotional damage. And I'm pleased to report that bow on the IC24 has now earned its rightful place on that list. I felt like a clown running through a minefield. But thankfully, my driving was not too shabby. So let's begin here with what I learned about boat speed from the driver's point of view. Firstly, actively and consistently pursuing a balanced helm is probably the single best drag reduction strategy there is. In other words, working with trimmers to minimize pressure on the helm. So going upwind, when you combine that balanced helm with a consistent heel angle that leverages the foil's underwater shape, and then trimming the main to the max to point that extra degree higher, got the boat into what I always call glide mode. You know it. It's that moment when the tiller goes a little bit quiet in your hand, the windward telltales start to flick up 45 degrees, and the jib's probably right on the edge of luffing, and yet you're gliding upwind at speed, sort of quietly really, higher and faster, hopefully, than those around you. And of course, it takes practice to lock into this mode and then keep it there, because you're on a knife edge between stalling and giving away precious upwind inches by not pointing high enough. I needed Coach Danny to be whispering in my ear, keep the bow up, Pete. So that glide mode became our performance cue, because it's performance you can sort of feel before you can measure, if you know what I'm talking about. And that meant that some of the quicker stretches for us were sort of low drama. They were the calm, almost unremarkable stretches when we got the boat to glide up. And that, of course, unlocks speed and you gain height. I loved it. And I found that during my stints as a driver, I was able to drop us into the mode more consistently as the week wore on, or so I thought, and then return to it more quickly, perhaps, after dropping out of it. It was all about ensuring the sail plan minimizes rudder pressure, checking the heel angles where we wanted to be, and keeping the bow up higher than maybe you feel comfortable with. Then it goes light, and then you're off and running. And all without instruments, which was great. So I think I came away from this week a better driver for sure. Not sure if my crewmates thought that. So now I just need to find a new boat, or maybe find a team that needs a driver like me. Another big learning for me was about anticipating and exploiting wind changes. Yes, I know that's obvious, Pete, but I hadn't really practiced time and time again preparing for puffs upwind, anticipating and heading up a fraction to meet it, because almost every gust is a lift, because it brings that apparent wind closer to the true wind. And then downwind, that immutable rule is, as we all know, stay inside that puff longer to extend low mode sailing. And that, of course, takes concentration and being intentional about staying in the puff rather than worry about boat-on-boat tactics. And, of course, this is all about coordination with your crew, because you need to avoid that downwind information collapse when everyone's looking forward at something that's going on rather than spotting gusts coming down behind us. You lose that information and you slow down. And I tell you what, I also picked up what is probably a fairly small, but for me, crucial detail. You might remember in the past, I asked Luke Lawrence about how do you get the correct spinner cassette angle coming out of the windward mark? How do you find that quickly rather than sort of fishing around for it while you're losing time and space? And that moment of rounding for me as a driver has always been plagued by sensory overload. You know what I mean? You're exiting the windward mark in a thicket of jostling boats. You've got one eye on boats trying to drive over you. You're trying to figure out angles, your team is readying the kite, and that cacophony of the teams yelling all around you. And in that chaos, I always find it quite hard to reorient myself to downwind angles. And I don't think I've ever really felt that I've nailed that kite set angle, that departure angle quickly enough, which leads to costly delay in getting to optimum downwind VMG. So I heard on this week a trick that I'd never really heard before. Kristen talked about apparent wind shutdown as being the spinner cassette angle trigger. And what's happening here is that upwind you're sailing with pretty normal, strong, forward apparent wind. But as you bear away around the windward mark, and especially around the offset mark, that apparent wind then rotates aft and its angle closes in on true wind. And you feel it on the back of your neck. It's that sort of sudden loss of pressure. And that's the shutdown moment, as KB called it. At that point, the load is coming off the rig. Therefore, the boat starts to feel a little bit soft and underpowered. The jib might even luff if you're too far at the bottom of the arc. Anyway, that's the kite set angle. You've got to set the kite there, because if you set it too early, i.e. before that point, then the kite can really load up violently, as we know, and destabilize the boat. If you set it too late, something that I'm really prone to, you lose distance and tactical positioning because you've missed that optimum angle. But the shutdown moment is that clean transfer point between upwind apparent wind mode and downwind true wind mode. Of course, you still have to distinguish this shutdown moment from other things that are going on. For example, other boats behind you have just taken your wind. So Danny and KB both emphasize that finding that angle, that set angle, matters more than obsessing over tactical positioning at that point. So sensing this shutdown point was something I subsequently chased for the next few days. I think I found it a few times, but of course it's never easy in that disturbed air of crowded surrounding. But I loved that. And there was so much information, so many tips and insight like this during all the briefing, but I love that one in particular. Okay, let's talk about the big one, starting. So as we all know, the start essentially compresses what can sometimes be a 45-minute windward-leeward race into a couple of critical minutes, that minute before the gun and the minute after the gun. And Kristen framed the biggest issue in starting as being the pre-start information overload that can lead to analysis, paralysis, and poor decision-making, basically. And being an advocate of this objective-based sailing, his whole approach is to simplify your starting execution by focusing on 3 priorities. 1, be on time and on the line. 2, be at full speed at the gun, which usually means at 20 seconds you're accelerating hard. And 3, know the favoured end and whether you're playing it or not. Easy, right? Being easily distracted myself, I found this short list really helpful on the water. And then, of course, with these 3 priorities in mind, it's time to think through your approach plan. My go-to approach has always been that port tack base leg, searching for a decent hole in the oncoming fleet with the intention of tacking back onto starboard at around 60 seconds for that final approach to the line, hopefully with a decent hole there. But the whole point of Performance Race Week is that it's a low-risk opportunity to try out different strategies. So when it's my turn on the helm, I chose the other strategy of going deep in the box and coming up on starboard inside the committee boat ley line. In the fiercely competitive J105 fleet that I was used to, that always felt a bit suicidal to me. But at Performance Race Week, I had the chance to try it a few times without actually shatting myself. I didn't perfect it by any means, but at least I was able to try it on for size, get used to it, and understand how that could work. Of course, which approach you take depends on things like which end is favoured, which side you want to head to after the gun, and also your level of comfort with the fleet density around you. But anyway, I love the opportunity to try something different. It was great. So I thought you might be interested in a bit of audio from one of the racers. And so here's how it sounded on board as we approach the start on a port base leg approach with roughly 45 seconds to go. We should have tacked earlier, but we didn't. We're tacking now. I'm driving. Taz is calling tactics. Dottie and Earl are doing some excellent trimming. And please forgive the rising excitement in my voice. As Treeby said in a recent Sailfaster episode, when you hear yourself act like this, you realise you really need to sound a lot calmer. Anyway, here you go.
45. You were blowing past this guy. I recommend you go above the light boat.
Thank you. Yeah, stay near the line. How's that?
That's good. Work yourself down a little bit. Watch Black Charles attacking in front of us.
Yeah,
Go behind him.
I'll go behind and then we'll tack.
Him.
I see him.
Seconds. You're in a great spot.
I'm going to go below these guys.
You gotta come up there.
Okay, I've got to tack here.
Yeah, go for it.
Here we go, tacking. I don't want to use up too much runway, so let's get going here, please. Too much feet.
Nice spot here, guys.
Loads of room below us.
20,
I'm coming down for
19,
acceleration now.
18, 16, 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6,
Let's come on.
4,
Full speed up.
3, 2, 1. Great spot here. Really, really nice. Bring it up.
Oh, so much better. So much better.
Steady pressure, same angle, faster than the boat below you.
Nice trimming, guys. Well, my heart is thumping just listening to that. And I'll tell you what, Tubi's right. Recording yourself on board is really revealing. Okay, a final area of learning from me from the week was all about mindset. I picked up some really terrific principles that underpin that kind of performance mindset. For example, the notion of anticipation being a primary performance advantage. And that's summed up in that aphorism, sailing is a game played best in the future. So the best sailors, of course, can work out what's going to happen seconds before it actually happens. Also, complexity kills good execution, right? And priorities restore it. KB drummed into us daily this notion of being objective-driven sailors, focusing on desired outcomes. For example, knowing the outcome you want from a rig tuning adjustment rather than trying to get a specific loose gauge number or something like that. Or that idea of racing the line, not your neighbor that I mentioned earlier. So think of what's the desired outcome and make that your objective. And of course, channeling Truby and simplifying communications reduces cognitive load on yourself during this very, very complex sport of ours. On our boat, we were really fortunate to have Taz, who, as a retired airline pilot, knows how to communicate important information with the least words possible, and also make sure that you played it back to him so that he knows you heard it. I found that really instructive and really useful. Also during the week, I just picked up this whole list of small but potentially crucial things. For example, applying a bit of vang or kicker if you're a Brit sailor prior to a jibe helps that main cross cleanly, especially in heavy weather, because the leech tightens and the sail moves across in that uniform manner. We did this and it worked. Also, crew kinetics, this is a big one, of course, using weight to assist steering downwind. We know all about that. And getting the crew to move as a single block of humans during tacks and jibes. Very, very critical. For myself, during a tack, I learned to wait and then move uphill with the roll rather than immediately hurling myself downhill like an angry buffalo falling off a skyscraper, which is my normal mode. And of course, synchronized crew movement transforms maneuvers. You get smoother transitions, hopefully less drag, and perhaps a little bit more speed out of that. So there you have it. My takeaways from a fantastic week at Performance Race Week. I loved it. I'd go tomorrow if I could. Okay, before we wrap, let's talk about how to get the best out of this kind of event. And let's hear from KB himself. Look, I wanted to talk to you about the difference between coming here as a sort of single sailor, which I'm doing effectively, and those who come here as teams.
Totally.
I just wanted to know your perspective on how you think that works.
Well, if you are coming here with specific objectives in mind, or you want to maximize the experience, then I think finding 3 other compatriots to come and share the experience with is the easiest way to accomplish that. Now, that requires a little bit of legwork or convincing sometimes to get either your crew or finding other folks to participate with you. But it's the easiest way to insulate or guarantee that you're going to get what you're looking for. And in many cases, it makes it easier for us to match the best coach for that as well. And you'll see there are several teams that came intact, even if they don't sail together back home. They're kind of part of the same network. And with that, we were able to do some pre-legwork. And in some cases, I went sailing with some of them before they even came down and so on and so forth. So it's definitely the best way to accomplish the goal of getting exactly what you want out of it. But the bulk of our sailors come as individuals, and they fill out a survey to really get at what their existing skill levels are and get at how we can pair them best with another sailors and coaches. And that's hard. We don't bat 100% on that for sure, but we try. And here's the reality is that unless you're brand new to the sport, you almost always either over or undersell yourself on that survey. And then you show up and you find out, you're not with the right pairing. And it turns out that, well, based upon what you told me, this is what I thought. And so it's hard to make a switch midweek. That's something that I'm actually looking to try to find a way to institutionalize into our program but it is disruptive when that happens. And so it's imperative that people are open, honest, and clear, or say, I don't know how to answer this question. So I'm going to improve that survey in the future to make it more effective at making those teams work.
Yeah, Kristen, for me, I think it's it's true of saying you're going to get invited to go to regattas, you're invited to join teams of people you may not know. So it's actually quite good practice.
I think there's something to teaching in that too. As people want to sail with higher profile teams or sail with other programs, how do they go about telling the story of their experience, their capacity, their skills? And so I think we can teach people how to put together a better sailing resume as well that is going to tell the true story of their sailing.
One advantage of being here sort of on your own, if you like, is that you're learning from new people on your team. You may be used to how people perform and communicate on your team, but it's good to learn from completely different people.
Yeah, absolutely. We try to make sure that there aren't 4 coaches on board the boat. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
And that the coach is the coach, the voice on board the boat, but also helping sailors learn how to as adults learn from one another and be open to it is part of what we're doing here. And so I've started to kind of warm people's minds up to that in the pre-emails so that they recognize that this is a social contract when they come here, that they're going to get out of this what they want, what they put into it. Early goings of this program, I think people used to like to come and sort of demonstrate to us what they knew instead of coming to us and laying bare what they don't know and helping us identify how we can fill in the gaps for them. If you're closed off to the education because you're trying to show off, you're going to have a limited experience here. You're still going to have a great time, but you won't go home learning as much as you could have.
How does somebody come here best equipped to get the most out of the week?
It requires a rigorous self-inspection. You have to look at your sailing and you have to ask, what are my pain points? Where do I consistently find friction in my sailing? And then you have to ask, why is that friction there? Is it a lack of understanding, a lack of skill, or something else that I don't understand yet? And then come here and share with your coach, hey, this is what I'm here to work on, or this is something I've identified I need to work on, and allow your coach to use their professionalism to help fix that. And so I really think, I'll oftentimes ask people, what are you here to work on? And they'll say everything. Well, that's an underprepared sailor. They should have had a priority to what they wanted to focus on. And everybody can work on everything. There's no doubt about that. But you want to come with at least a thesis that you're trying to polish up. And if you have that, then we can be much better equipped to deliver for you.
KB was the perfect leader for this. He's obviously brilliant sailor, brilliant coach. He's extremely funny, very relatable, and he broke things down into really sort of a pragmatic approach rather than highly theoretical, and that was hugely helpful. I want to include some thoughts from fellow attendees, many of whom had been to multiple performance weeks, as you'll hear. Here's CW, a sailor who's experienced multiple performance race weeks. You'll also hear from Taz and Mark Fruin and Dottie from our team.
It's not just the coaching, it's also the participant and the camaraderie. It fascinates me how you can take 4 people who've never met each other before and turn them into a crew in 5 days. And you can see how much better sailor you become from Monday through Friday. You sail on different boats. So J70s, IC24, sonars, J80. I have met sailors from everywhere, from all over the United States, from all over the world. Sailors are a tribe of people that are very passionate about this thing, sailboat racing. And it doesn't matter what boat you sail, it doesn't matter how good you are, you still all have that passion. I love everything about it. For me, there's no negative. All the instructors are awesome. Everybody who comes here comes with the same really positive attitude. You become friends for life.
You have new people that you're working with every time you come to one of these things. And the new people have different personalities. They have different priorities. They have different experience levels. And that's the value. Learning to sail with new guys. You can test your own limits, or you can try new things that you never tried before. If you go too far, you got Danny back there to say, yeah, no, we're not doing that. Or if they don't go well, you got Danny back there to say, hey, this is why that didn't work, and this is how you fix it.
Being in a highly competitive fleet, there are some positions on the boat. Even as a driver, you have to understand every position. So I'm really down here to kind of hone in other skill sets other than the ones I'm most familiar, i.e., trimming the mane and loving having my own coach sitting there just coaching me along in a very supportive manner and giving me good guidance on how to make it all come together.
So this was my third one. I've found a lot of value in it over the years. I think there's things that are very hard to replicate in other places. I've talked a lot about what I learned starting, and you can really only learn that when you're starting in traffic. So to me, that's just like a massive value that this clinic has. So there were some things that really came together, and some of them seem kind of silly, but one of them was is sometimes downwind, you kind of end up hobby horsing a little bit, and just realizing that's a crew weight position thing where it's if you kind of seeing that and then you can kind of condense the crew weight a little bit. I think that was a takeaway for that kind of downwind sailing and upwind too. But then the other one that I really liked that seems really simple, but I think really helped me in the pre-start was if you're going kind of reaching back and forth, you don't want a boat parallel to you or between you and the line. You'd much rather be behind them or in front of them. And that kind of gives you a lot more maneuverability. So that kind of lesson was something KB mentioned earlier in the week. And it's something that I was oh yeah, I could implement that right away.
Okay, let's wrap this up. So the things that stayed with me long after I'd left the Caribbean were things like performance sailing is rarely about knowing more. It's much more likely to be about coordinating better as a crew. Knowing that the boat wants to see one moving block of humans, and that when the maneuvers become more synchronized in this way, they become smoother, faster, and certainly less stressful. Anticipation being a real competitive advantage, that notion of the game being played in the future. And then how about priorities, reducing cognitive load and pressure? Reacceleration proved to be this universally important performance skill after tacks, roundings, disruptions, and it seemed to me that speed recovery matters more sometimes than maybe the maneuver itself. Finally, perhaps the most important lesson was philosophical. The structure of the week deliberately created this space that's pretty rare in this sport, and that is where mistakes are expected, visible and analyzable, if that's a word. And in that kind of safe environment, learning accelerates dramatically. So whether you're sailing IC24s in Caribbean trade winds, dinghies on a local lake, or tracking squalls in offshore racing, the lessons are seek balance, move together, communicate clearly, simplify decisions, practice transitions, operate ahead of the present moment. So easy, isn't it? Anyway, thanks to KB and the Northview American Sailing team for the fantastic opportunity to be there. And if I were you, I'd sign up for the next one. You can go to americansailing.com and look up performance race weeks under event. You'll see them all listed out there. Or just email me at pete@sailfast.com and I'll connect you with Kristen. Thanks for listening. See you on the water.